Happy New Year, everyone. 2020 is here, and we have a lot to get to today. Democrats are rooting for America's enemies in the Middle East. You've got Iranian militias storming the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. You have people calling for it as Trump's Benghazi. Also, a good guy stopped a church shooter from a mass carnage event in Texas. More anti-Semitic attacks, hate crime versus thought crimes, and the Pope slaps away a hand. Coming up. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. 2020 edition. Very exciting stuff. Glad to be back here today. I had a good vacation except for getting sick right before my birthday, and I'm still a little bit under the weather. So if my voice sounds weird to you, it's because it's weird. And also, producer Mark doesn't even feel he's got a sniffle. So we're like the walking wounded today in the Freedom Hop. We couldn't stay away for another day. Mark was like, forget Jamaican beaches. I don't need any of that. I want to come back to Freedom Hut and make sure that America is getting all that it needs.
No offense to America, but I do need Jamaican beaches.
Well,
Who
okay.
doesn't need that?
Well, after the election, I told him he gets to take another vacation. In the meantime, we have much to get to today, and I wanted to just start off with what we could expect the Democrat and media response would be after an incident that looked like it was going to get very, very ugly, very unsettling. In Iraq, we could have had the storming of an embassy. Now, that has happened before. This is a situation that for some would be either reminiscent of the storming of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran or what happened in Benghazi, where you had two U.S. facilities, the consulate and the annex. It wasn't really a consulate, but that's a discussion for another time. Two U.S. facilities overrun by terrorists. We were told it was a video. We will get to that, to be sure. But I just wanted to give you some of the background on what's going on in Iraq. And also put out there, for those of you who are very close listeners to the show, I told you some months ago that we were going to be put under pressure from Iranian-backed groups and from the Iranian-backed, not just militia groups, but also the Iranian-backed political groups that have seats in the Iraqi parliament. They want us out. And by the way, just because they want us out, it doesn't mean we shouldn't get out. It doesn't mean that we should avoid the decision that we think is best. Sometimes what the bad guys want you to do is, in fact, the thing that you have to do under the circumstances. See Afghanistan, for those of you who are wondering, another circumstance like that. But let's start with what happened here. And this is going to turn very quickly into, because nothing terrible happened at the embassy, thank God, because of quick work by United States Marines and by the U.S. military, the administration. They did the right thing here. They shored up the embassy, but it got a little scary there for a few moments. And certainly the video of it was circulating all over social media. With a quick backstory to this, and it's also just a reminder of Trump's foreign policy is better than Obama's. Trump's economy is better than Obama's. There aren't whole parts of cities being burned down because of hatred of the police under Trump as there were under Obama. I mean, we have a lot to look at here and say, hold on a second. How could any objective observer, based on solely the results of what this administration has done, how can anyone look at this and say, one, that it doesn't compare favorably to his predecessor, Barack Obama, but also, why would you ever want to trust some of these Democrats, these loons? Although we lost another one. Another one's down from the Democrat field. We'll get to that. Why would you want to put them in charge? What reason other than Trump hatred and a love of open borders and socialism and big government? I guess those are all the reasons that they have, or many of the reasons they have. Why would you want to put a Democrat in charge? Foreign policy is, even for those of you who say, look, that's not an area of tremendous interest, or rather you think it gets too much focus in the media, which is true. The media loves to show how smart they are by learning the names of some obscure country or obscure city in a country somewhere. Iraq obviously doesn't fall into that category, but and then they go on TV and pretend like I've known all along what's going on in this corner of Papua New Guinea. They don't know, but they pretend to know. They are generally ignoramuses in the television media. The left-wing Democrats who pretend to be so worldly and cosmopolitan, they spend more time spraying their hair than they do reading about the places they're talking about. And I know because I've seen them doing it. But in Iraq, you have a place that, once again, the previous administration failed, and this current administration has not fixed it. It's not all better, and it's not going to be great, by the way, but is dealing with this in a more sound fashion than the Democrats did and then his predecessor did. And amazing that these Obama foreign policy figures, people like Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power, and others, they'll take to Twitter right away and show us exactly who they are, which is desperate to defend the legacy of an administration that was an abject failure on foreign policy. You cannot point to a single place. And people say, oh, this is a whataboutism. No, it's not. We're going into an election year, right? You have a Republican administration, 3 years going into fourth year now of foreign policy. You have 8 years of Democrats before it. This matters. The comparison matters. It's actually essential to the decision-making that we'll all have in about 300 and some odd days. It's close, my friends. It's game time. 2020 is going to be a big year here in the hut. Now back to Iraq for a moment. What happened? Well, as you know, there has been malign Iranian influence in Iraq since the U.S. invasion there. I mean, you could say it stretched even back before that, although Iraq and Iran had, I believe, the longest declared war of the 20th century. It went on for about a decade between two nation-state combatants. Someone could fact-check me on that, but I think that's the case. The Iran-Iraq war stretched on for about nine years and change. And horrific casualties and a lot of very bad stuff going on there. But the Iranians, because Iraq has a Shia majority population, roughly about 40% of the population of Iraq is Shia. Maybe it's closer to 50 now. And then you have about 20% Sunni, and then you got about 10 to 15% Kurd, and the rest is a mix of Yazidis and different groups of Christians. There were Christians in Iraq, not really anymore, thanks to what happened in the Obama years, or to be fair, in the Bush years. But you have these Shia-backed militias, and they can turn the heat up to try to get what they want. This is classic partnering, in a sense, between, well, not just an external adversary, the Iranians, but also these groups that have connections in the political process. There's a little bit of a Sinn Féin IRA thing going on here. These different Shia militias have politicians who are pushing the interests of Iran and the Shia majority in Iraq, pushing the interests in the parliament. And then when they don't get what they want, they have this military wing. They have this armed faction that they'll bring to bear. And these groups, by the way, let's keep in mind, were responsible for a large percentage of U.S. casualties in Iraq. So these Shia militia groups they're our enemies, and they've been our enemies for a long time. They were killing U.S. soldiers. We were not at war with Iran, but Iran was at war with us in Iraq, fighting a proxy battle there. The Shia militia groups were using something called EFPs, explosively formed penetrators, that were designed to go through the hulls of armored vehicles so that they could kill and maim everyone inside, our soldiers. So we took a lot of losses because Iranian-made EFPs and Iranian-backed groups with those specific explosive devices were killing our guys. And we were not nearly hard enough on them, in my opinion, in that process. And then you had the Obama administration, which just took this, I'm going to bend the knee to Iran, anything to get them into an international nuclear deal, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is a really fancy name for a steaming pile of horse manure. And they came up with this deal, and it was Obama's foreign policy legacy, and now we see that the Iranians didn't change any behavior. All they got was a lot of money, literally delivered to them with pallets of cash by the Obama administration. I'll never forget being on CNN talking about this. They gave us hostages, and we gave them cash. We gave them pallets of cash, right? Just big old bricks of money. But that wasn't paying off a terrorist regime. Oh no, I went with all the foreign policy experts. I think even Gurgling Gurgen was with that. Terrorists not paying. It was nonsense. But so you have these groups, and they will sometimes engage in violence for very explicit political purposes inside of Iraq. And in this case, they harmed a U.S. They harmed U.S. soldiers and killed the U.S. contractor. So what did the Trump administration do? The Trump administration didn't say, that's really naughty. We're going to send you a very terse letter, Shia militia group. We're going to actually take action against you. We are going to blow up some of these groups. We're going to hurt you. We're going to hit you in ways that you will remember. And so then you had these Shia-backed groups, the Popular Mobilization Forces, they call it, essentially Iranian-backed group, who looked like they were about to storm the embassy. I mean, they set fire to things. They got into the outer ring of security. And there are some very harrowing photos of U.S. Marines, who Marines do embassy security around the world. God bless our Marines. And they didn't end up overrunning the United States Embassy. I mean, I'm familiar with this embassy. It was built to be a fortress. I think it cost $750 million, I believe, was what this thing cost. So you've got roughly close to $1 billion facility that they spent just to make sure that we have an embassy there that would not be easy to overrun. But Kataib Hezbollah, that's right, Hezbollah, like the terrorist group in Iran, in Lebanon, that's also backed by the Iranians. The Iranians are very bad. I know that's the most simplistic thing that anybody could ever hear today, but it is a reminder because the Obama administration took the approach of, no, the Iranians are just misunderstood. The Iranian regime, if placated, if bought off, might be more buddy-buddy with the international community and with us. We just have to be nicer to them. No, that's not the approach. That's certainly not what Trump does. And so yet again, we have a moment where Trump is supposed to be in over his head on foreign policy. This is, we're told, an area where he doesn't understand what's going on. He has no, and yet the decision-making is better. The outcome is better. They were calling for this to be, and I mean major media figures, different official Twitter accounts out there. Oh, this is going to be Trump's Benghazi. No, because this administration sends in an additional 750 troops, sends in an additional 100 Marines right away to reinforce our embassy, and tells our enemies, and they believe it when he says it, if you mess with us, we will crush you. That is a difference between Trump and Obama and the Democrats on foreign policy.
Well, I think it's been handled very well. The Marines came in. We had some great warriors come in and do a fantastic job. They were there instantaneously as soon as we heard. I use the word immediately. They came immediately, and it's in great shape. As you know, this will not be a Benghazi. Benghazi should never have happened. This will never, ever be a Benghazi. But we have some of our greatest warriors there. They got in there very quickly. As soon as we saw there was a potential for problem, they got in, and there was no problem whatsoever. I also want to thank the Iraqi government. They really stepped up. I spoke to the Prime Minister today. I thanked him, but they stepped up very nicely.
So the protesters now, who are actually thugs, I mean, these were militia groups backed by Iran. This was amazing. The New York Times, they've backed down. So the embassy is not under threat the way that it was. I think because our enemies do understand that this administration will go after them, will make it hurt. When this team that works with this White House, that's a part of this senior rung of national security, says you will rue the day that you cross the United States, I think it is believed by the bad guys. It may not be believed by the New York Times editorial board, but that doesn't matter. The bad people understand that Trump means it. And as I've said before, we had some long discussions about how Tombstone is a great movie over Christmas dinner this year. You want Doc Holliday to be the one with the howitzer, the street howitzer sometimes. You want the bad guys to feel like the guy with the biggest weapon has a bit of an itchy trigger finger if they get out of line. And that's Trump. That's a difference. One of the important ways, I think, to separate him and the way that he approaches these issues from his predecessor and from what would be the follow-on administration of any Democrat that comes along. But they were calling this Benghazi before anything had even really before we had even seen where this was going. Joy Reid, who is a prominent host on MSNBC, who is the one who wrote all the homophobic stuff 10 years ago and then said that people hacked in, and she told the FBI that they hacked into her computer or hacked into her account and wrote it for her. I mean, just laughable stuff. She kept her job, by the way. That's now the Democrat. Oh, I've talked to the FBI. They're investigating. So this time machine plan that I've unveiled for all of you, maybe this is real. She tweeted out as Trump's Benghazi unfolds in Iraq, right as this was going on. There's also an account called Vote Vets, which I assume is, this is like some Democrat. I'll check and see what they are. Some, Democrat thing where, oh yeah, vote Vets means vote Democrat. They tweeted out, you're about to have, more or less to Trump, I'm paraphrasing here, but, you're about to have your own Benghazi in Iraq in response to Trump. You see, no, that's not true, because people forget the real context for Benghazi. People forget now, especially the leftists who have never learned the lessons of Benghazi. And let's be honest, just didn't really care. Obama was more important to them. Obama's reelection was more important than any accountability for Hillary Clinton. That's right, Secretary of State, while the facilities are getting burned down and people are being killed, our people in Benghazi. And Obama, there was no accountability for it. Right? And this is why they lied about the video. Because Obama's whole thing was, the CIA found where bin Laden is. And after like months of dithering, Obama says, yeah, like send in our team. God bless our SEALs. They did what they do. They took out the bad guy. They took out bin Laden. And then Obama's like, that's right. I'm the biggest, baddest foreign policy guy ever. And that was the story, right? Bin Laden is dead. General Motors is alive. And then Benghazi happens right before the election on September 11th, no less. And the narrative was in danger. So Democrats circled the wagons to protect the narrative that Obama was somehow still really on top of the whole, counterterrorism, anti-terrorism game, and knew what he was doing, and just so smart on these issues, so much smarter than Bush was. That's tough to say when you have the first U.S. first U.S. ambassador killed since the Vietnam War, and you have 3 other brave Americans die along with him. And many others almost die were it not for some fantastic patriots like Tonto and others, Chris Paronto and the others. In the very excellent, I think, underrated movie 13 Hours, by the way, which producer Mark, have you seen that one? You just give me a nod. Okay, you have homework, producer Mark. 13 Hours is an excellent movie. You will enjoy it, too. It's not a boring movie at all. But those guys kept that facility, the annex facility, from being overrun and all the agency personnel inside, perhaps, from being killed. That was while Obama was in charge. Right? But so why would they jump immediately to calling it Trump's Benghazi? How could they make that leap? Well, because the narrative is more important to them even than concern over U.S. personnel and military lives. And then there's we're a little more on what happened in Iraq, and then we've got to move on to the shooting in the church in Texas and what stopped it, all these anti-Semitic attacks in the New York area, some very troubling social justice first, your health and safety and property later, some other time, criminal justice policies here in New York City that I know are also happening in other parts of the country. We'll get into all of that. And then some election update stuff. But just first, I wanted to note that the New York Times, while you have the popular mobilization forces, is what they call them, this is essentially, a lot of these authoritarian Mideast regimes have this or support this in other countries. These are, I could speak to you for a long time, as you guys all remember, or I talk about it sometimes. I was on the CIA's Iraq desk for years, so this was something that I was reading about and dealing with all day, all night. I was over in Iraq a couple of times dealing with this as well, dealing with these different issues. So you have these groups like the Badr Corps. You have these different political entities. You also have these military entities that support political entities that are part of the factional fight. There's a sectarian fight between Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, who are different ethnicity, same religion as the Sunni and Shia. The Kurds are Sunni Muslim, but they are different ethnically and religious. When it comes to their language, linguistically was the word I was looking at. But you have this fight continuing on right now, and it's not going to stop. So I'm not pretending that Trump fixed this, but there were airstrikes in response to the killing of the American contractor, and also some wounded U.S. soldiers. And then this popular mobilization force, which is which is also tied in with and backed by these Iranian militias like Kataib, Hezbollah. And I know that we're getting into all these different, it's probably more detail than is really needed right now. And the New York Times You know, they keep telling us they're not the enemy of the people, these news organizations. They keep claiming that, you know, there's nothing to see here when it comes to the dishonesty and the dishonorable approach that they have to covering the news and to the way that they present these different facts and issues. But I've just got to say, I mean, first of all, they're lying to you about the legacy of previous administration in Iraq. They're lying to you constantly about the reality of the Iran nuclear deal. And then the New York Times tweets this out. Hundreds of Iraqi mourners tried to storm the United States Embassy in Baghdad, shouting, "Down, down, USA," in response to deadly American airstrikes this week that killed 25 fighters. I mean, that framing of this issue is absolutely stunning. These are not mourners, all right? This is very similar to the Washington Post calling Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi an austere religious scholar. These are not mourners. These are mobilized thugs of the Iranian regime in Iraq. Now, look, there are separations between Iran and Shia in Iraq in what they want, but they work together on some things, and the Iranian malign influence here has been a problem stretching back to the beginning of our invasion of Iraq. But the New York Times takes this, it's just amazing. I mean, the New York Times takes this position that these are mourners who are storming. I mean, it's like they're setting it up so that there will be, if something really bad happens here, it's like, oh, this was just an uprising of people who are upset about U.S. airstrikes. I guess, you know, this is a policy failure in Iraq. No. This is our enemy, longtime enemy, or enemies in Iraq, going after the United States Embassy there and the Trump administration saying, sorry, not going to happen. And if they had tried to overrun our Marines, I mean, it would have been a bloodbath on the, with the bad guys taking a majority of the losses, hopefully all of them. Protesters storm U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. That's the headline the Washington Post had. Remember, the embassy is not, it's now secure again. The protesters have been dispersed. I mean, this was a mob. This was a terrorist-aligned group that was engaged in an effort to overrun a United States diplomatic facility. And you could just tell, by the way, there was almost like cackling in the media, like a bunch of hyenas, that, ooh, this is going to look so bad for Trump. That's their first concern. Not that we have Marines who might have to defend themselves and fellow Americans with lethal force. Not that we could lose American diplomatic personnel, Marines, and other military and other U.S. government officials in what is still a war zone. So that's how they put it. Secretary Pompeo put it out this way when this attack happened. The attack today was orchestrated by terrorists Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis and Qais al-Khazali, and abetted by Iranian proxies Hadi al-Amari and Falah al-Fayed. All are pictured below outside our embassy. Those of you who served in Iraq, I remember these guys. I remember them. They've been bad guys all along. They have the blood of U.S. soldiers in their hands. And if it weren't for unfortunately the relatively weak hand we have now in directing Iraqi politics, some of these guys should have been taken off the battlefield. And I mean kinetic. These are bad people. Qais al-Khazali has the blood of Americans on his hands. These are people that are our enemies. And they're all gathered outside an embassy. And they're overseeing this. And they know that they can't be touched right now because of the political realities of the Shia majority in Iraq. And our own news media is running propaganda for them and talking about how maybe this is going to be Trump's Benghazi. They keep telling us that they're not the enemy of the people. They keep claiming that that's an unfair thing to say about them. But I have to ask the question, at what point are they rooting for our enemies? And is it just too apparent for anyone to ignore? At what point does it become clear to even a casual observer that there are so many people in our own news media who would, if given their choice, see catastrophe unfold in Iraq, including the loss of U.S. lives, all right? Marines' families getting folded flags, that happening, and people in the media having to hide their glee at the prospect of what this would do to the Trump administration, how bad it would look for the Trump administration. They're not the enemies of the people? I mean, they're the enemies of those who are downrange and in harm's way. I'd like to know when it's too much. Calling it Trump's Benghazi before any sane person could think that is what happened here is just a step away from rooting for it to be Trump's Benghazi. And we all know that beneath this, behind this, they were rooting for it to be Trump's Benghazi. But here's the problem that they didn't anticipate or that they can't figure out. Trump isn't Obama. Trump isn't Hillary. The reason Benghazi happened was because of inept leadership, cable after cable asking for greater security, people downrange in harm's way saying, we need help. Where are you guys? Obama and Hillary were too busy getting flowery editorials written about them in the Washington Post, the New York Times, doing, having their staff members do puff interviews on CNN, or they themselves doing puff interviews on CNN. Didn't have time to take care of one of the most important countries in terms of U.S. foreign policy at that time, because Hillary and co. decided they were going to overthrow the government there, so they made Libya important, whether we wanted it to be or not. They didn't have the time to really do their jobs. They didn't have the time to be honest with the American people afterwards, it seems, either. Susan Rice lied, said that it was about a video. Others in the administration lied. Candy Crowley. Before we saw beyond any reasonable doubt that CNN was in fact a left-wing propaganda organization, Candy Crowley unfairly and wrongly intervened in a presidential election in favor of Obama on this very issue against then would-be President Mitt Romney, who I know Mitt is disappointing these days. Would have been better than Obama. Would have been better than Obama. What we see happening abroad and the way the media covers it is a reflection of the same approach they take to everything here in this country. They're hoping, we know this, some of them have said it, they're hoping that there will be a massive correction in the stock market, which will also be part of a huge economic downturn, a recession, people out of work, people not able to pay their mortgages, people committing suicide because they're just in so much despair. I mean, that happens when there are recessions. You can see the numbers correspond to this at a national level. They're hoping that all of that happens. They're rooting now against the country, not just in Iraq, but they're rooting against the country in general because things are going so well that they know they do not have a good shot of regaining power. And they prefer power to the good fortune and the prosperity and the freedom of the American people. If these two things are in conflict, our own news media and the Democratic Party would prefer that things go badly for you and me and the rest of the country. They would prefer that things get rough and things fall apart, abroad, at home, you name it, as long as it means that they can regain power. And then they'll sort it all out, and they'll justify this, just as all socialists and communists and authoritarians and totalitarians throughout the last, really, now going on a couple hundred years. People forget the earliest socialists. Marx wasn't the first socialist. This was the socialist theories came after, really, the French Revolution, which I've talked to you about here on the show, and perhaps something we'll return to at some point. There were others that were espousing similar ideas. Just Marx and Engels were the ones that really had it catch on. But this is the reality for socialists and for communists. They can always look at whatever's going on in any country and say, yo, but you don't I just said, yo, sorry. You don't understand. Things will be great in the future, so whatever you have to suffer now, we're taking you to a better future. That's always the excuse. And so they will root for our suffering today if it means they're in power tomorrow and they get to bring you into this utopia that they promised. But here's the problem, my friends. These people are incompetent. And at their core, they accept an anti-Americanism that is a disgrace. Because really what matters to them more than anything else is that they're the ones who get to call the shots about your life, what's going on in the world, in America, and that they get to control not just the levers of power, but the narrative around how things are going. So that's why whether you are interested in what's going on in Iraq politically and otherwise or not, I mean, at least now we know our Marines and our U.S. personnel are safe for the time being. But if you're interested in that or not, let's just understand something. The left is rooting for failure there just like they are rooting for failure here. So you must remember that. That will be in the background for this entire 2020 election cycle.
Your basic problem with Trump is not the 17 ways that you think he resembles Mussolini, as you wrote. Your real problem with Donald Trump is that he's dismantling this universal American empire, which for you is the moral obligation for Americans to run the world. That's the problem. And nationalism is an answer to that.
I just wanted to play that little bit from a debate between Yoram Hazony, who's written In Defense of Nationalism and has really now been credited with, this should have been done a long time ago, but nationalism had taken on this inherently negative connotation because of National Socialism and because of different nationalistic ideologies that were odious and destructive and wrong. But that, nationalism versus patriotism, it just became this differentiation of connotation. And instead, he's saying, look, countries should tend to their own affairs. We believe this at the state level in this country, right? This is why our entire system is really built on, there are some things you really got to leave to the local. There's some things you leave to something a unit a little bigger than that. States and other countries, it would be a province or, a canton or whatever they call it. A wilayat, if you're going to do it along the Ottoman system. Boom, knowledge. But that there's a reason for that. Right? It's the same reason why certain companies try to stay, military, a better option. Well, why do you have a fire squad and then, you've got a platoon and then you've got a company and you've got a battalion and you go down. The organization is different because once things get to a certain number, a certain level, it becomes more unwieldy. It becomes less possible to operate the way that it should and to have the kind of cohesiveness, ideologically or otherwise, that is necessary. So nationalism can be a force for good, is Hazony's argument. And he's debating, and I didn't get to play any of his, Brett Stevens, who's a wildly overrated and very childish intellectual. Wildly overrated intellectual, very childish as well. He's the one who got so upset when he was called, I think, a bedbug and completely flipped out and wanted somebody to get in all kinds of trouble for calling him a bedbug. I don't know. I've been called way worse things than bedbugs by people who really like them. So Brett Stevens and Hazony are having this discussion over the nature of the American role in the world, nationalism, imperialism, foreign policy. And I mean, here's a fundamental, and I just wanted to get to this. I know we've spent more time probably on foreign policy today than I had intended, but remember that there are lessons. I mean, I worked Iraq and Afghanistan as a CIA officer, and there are lessons that we should all be able to draw at this point. We do not want to be in the business of running, building, defending other countries. We don't want to do that anymore, okay? We should be trying to get away from that as much as we possibly can. We should be trading with countries. We should have allies and friends, but we are not shouldering the burden of, we're going to make your country a better place, okay? We should not be doing that anymore. And I think that that's important because the U.S. troops now getting sent to, we got a few thousand that are getting sent. I believe 82nd Airborne has a quick reaction force that is being, or rapid reaction, they have some other name for it. It's not technically a QRF, but it's something like that. They're sending into the Middle East. You have this military escalation, all about Iran. We don't want a war with Iran. Iran is a small economy, a country that, because of its leadership, not the Iranian people who are actually pretty great, but because of its leadership and the ideology that runs the country, the military and security services there, is a backwards place and is regressive. It does have the ability to cause some problems for us in the Middle East, but we don't want to go to war with Iran. We should just tell the Iranians, we're going to keep strangling your economy, maximum pressure campaign, exactly what Trump is doing. And you step out of line, if you slap us, we're going to punch you right in the nose, Iran. That's the approach. But we can't allow the punch of the nose to turn into, oh no, now we're going to have a steel cage match, 12 rounds. We're going to try to really just get in there and deal with this and make it a different country. Trump has the right instinct on this. The military-industrial complex, which is a real thing, and the national security apparatus here, and the people who think, and there are many of them, and they have privileged perches like Brett Stevens, people that have never seen what it's really like to be in a position where you are a combatant in a war zone. Very easy to always talk about toppling governments and, the flowering of Jeffersonian democracy throughout the Middle East and all this stuff, when you don't see how that will go so very, very wrong, not just in Iraq, but also in Afghanistan, by the way. So I would hope that Trump has learned those lessons. I think he has, but he's going to have to fight. He's going to have to push back on his own people. Because I'm telling you, there are those who are still in very powerful positions in the national security apparatus who want a war with Iran. And if we get into a war with Iran, I'm out. I mean, I'm done. I can't handle it. No more defending the Republican Party. I got to figure out something else to do.